that in the moment you don't really think about them too much. They don't seem so strange. And then only many years later do you realize how bizarre they were. It's kind of like waking up from a dream, where in the dream everything, as bizarre as it is, it still makes sense. But when you wake up, you realize how nothing made sense. So that's the closest thing that I can compare Walterology to. Although my questions are not actually directed towards Walter, but they are directed towards his place of employment, which was the Skokie Yeshiva High School, otherwise known as HTC, Hebrew Theological College. And this high school was throughout the year was a high school, but then in the summer they used the campus for a camp known as Yeshivas Hakayitz, which to this day, 2024, is still running. And it was a Jewish summer camp, and as such, right, as a Jewish school, so they had a synagogue on campus. And typical of many synagogues in the United States, there was a wall that was a memorial wall. Like it had plaques with names of people in the community who had passed away, and their families donate to put a plaque on the wall to remember their loved ones. And what was unique about this wall was that there was one spot on the wall that it said on it, it wasn't a plaque, it just said Richtman reserved. Handwritten with what looked like sidewalk chalk. It was a black placeholder, and it said Richtman reserved. Okay, so at the time, you don't think about it too much, right? Walter Richtman was in fact the camp cook, and that's where he worked, so maybe he reserved it for someone, right? But for who, right? That's the question. Who was Richtman reserving this spot for? So those of you who are well versed with the text might immediately jump to the conclusion that, this was reserved for some brave kid, right? The kid who threw soup at Walter and had Walter's fist go through his ribcage and out his back. But obviously, let's be realistic for a second, right? Walter, as far as we know, did not actually murder anyone. And if he did, why the hell would he write Richtman reserved on the wall as some sort of sick joke? So let's be completely realistic now, right? Walter worked at the school. He was about 50 years old at the time. Both his parents, Dolek and Rosa, were both still alive. So you might think, maybe it was for Walter's parents. Maybe he was reserving a plaque for his parents that one day when they pass on, he will be able to have their name put up in the synagogue. The only problem with that is that Walter's parents lived in Omaha. They lived in Omaha, Nebraska for over 50 years at that point. And meaning whenever they do pass on, they're not going to have their name put up on a plaque in Skokie, Illinois, right? They would have their names be put up on a plaque in their own synagogue, the synagogue in Omaha, for the Jewish community in Omaha. So let's keep going on we're trying to find realistic reasons. Why did the school, or why did whoever wrote it, why did they write Richtman reserved, right? So it couldn't be for Walter's parents, because they didn't live there, right? Walter's siblings. Walter had a brother named Max and a sister named Anne. But again, Max lived in Washington, D.C. He never lived in Chicago. And Walter's sister Anne, who at that point was no longer Richtman, she was Anne Kaplan, she lived in Minnesota. So again, when they do pass on, they will have their names put on plaques in their own communities. In fact, Max, I don't think at that point was affiliated with any Jewish community and didn't daven in any synagogue. So again, back to the question, why did it say Richtman reserved? That's what doesn't make sense. And why was it written with chalk? I don't understand, right? If you're going to have a placeholder to save a spot for somebody on the memorial wall, at the very least, have it like engraved on plastic or even printed on a piece of paper, something that looks respectable. This would look like it was written by a 12-year-old kid. It just said Richtman reserved with either chalk or maybe it was whiteout. It was not written very nicely. And there was no one else named Richtman in the school. So who would it be for? Would it be for Walter himself? That doesn't make sense for two reasons. Number one, at the time, like I said, Walter was only 50 years old. So his life expectancy, despite the fact that he smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day, he never once took a sick day in his 35 years working there. So why would they put one up for him? And the other question on that would be, Walter also didn't pray there. That wasn't his synagogue. Yeah, it was a synagogue that happened to be in the place where he worked, but he didn't live there, right? And to prove it to you, right? So this was a sleepaway camp, and we prayed in the synagogue all throughout the week and also on Saturdays, and not once did I ever see Walter in the synagogue, not during the week, and not even on Saturday, right? Saturday he was home. He was religious, and I'm sure he prayed in another synagogue, but not this one. So again, even when his time comes, his name will be memorialized on a plaque in his respective synagogue and not this one. Which then goes back to the first question, who wrote Richtman Reserved and why was it there? And not only that, right, you might think, oh, well, maybe this was, right, again, trying to rule out all possibilities, all realistic possibilities. You could say, well, maybe it was just a kid. Maybe a kid was writing a prank, and he wrote Richtman Reserved as a joke because he knew that Walter smoked 5 packs of cigarettes and drank heavily. But again, that also doesn't make sense because if it was a joke, so then one of the faculty members would have seen it and had it removed. I was in camp from 2001 to 2004, 4 years, and every single year that I was in camp, the same exact Richtman Reserved was on the wall. Not even like it was erased and then written again. No, it was the same one. So for 4 years it was reserved, perhaps even more than 4 years. But who wrote it? Who put it there?